مشاهدينا مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. اتهمت إيران الولايات المتحدة بالمماطلة في المحادثات التي تهدف إلى إحياء الاتفاق النووي المبرم عام 2015، بينما أعلنت الخارجية الأمريكية أن الاتفاق بشأن إحياء خطة العمل الشاملة المشتركة أقرب مما كان عليه قبل أسبوعين. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة ينضم إلينا جيسون برودسكي مدير السياسات في منظمة متحدون ضد إيران النووية. سيد جيسون مرحبا بك معنا.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
إلى أين وصل الاتفاق النووي وما القضايا العالقة؟
Well, I think the Iranians have submitted additional demands in response to what the EU called a final text that it sent back to the capitals who were involved in the negotiation. And Iran is still making more requests regarding the issue of guarantees, and also has trimmed its request on the closure of the International Atomic Energy Agency's outstanding safeguards probe, but it hasn't completely dropped that demand. And so the U.S. right now is considering the Iranian demands. As of Wednesday, the U.S. is supposed to send back its response. And I don't anticipate that the U.S. will accept Iran's demands. So we could see them going back and forth for some more time.
ما شكل الاتفاق الذي سيتم التوافق عليه باعتقادك؟
I think the general contours will be very similar to what we had in 2015 in terms of the nuclear restrictions, but I think it's important for your audience to understand that the sunset clock on the original deal has already started to tick. And without according to public reports, if they're accurate, the United States has not been demanding that those sunset provisions be lengthened. So what has happened is, because of the advances Iran has made in its nuclear program over the last year, it has produced a shorter and weaker nuclear deal for the United States and the rest of the international community. And Iran, in return, has been demanding more sanctions relief than it received under the 2015 nuclear deal. So a shorter and weaker nuclear deal for the West, and a stronger deal for Iran because of the reports that it may have achieved non-nuclear sanctions relief on some entities.
هناك الكثير من الأنباء التي يتم تداولها لا نعلم مدى صحتها، مثلا أن أخذ الرهائن يؤتي أرباحا ضخمة للحرس الثوري. يقال إن إدارة بايدن عزم على تقديم ما لا يقل عن 11 مليار دولار للإيرانيين مقابل رهائن أمريكيين. هل هذا صحيح أم مجرد تضخيم إعلامي؟
I would not be surprised that it's sequenced that way. This has happened in the past, but it also raises a concern here because, as I mentioned to you earlier, the Iran has not completely dropped its demand for the International Atomic Energy Agency to close the outstanding safeguards probe into its undeclared nuclear activities at undeclared sites. And it, at the moment, is not necessarily conditioning the closure of that probe on its agreement to the terms that are on the table right now of the deal, but it is conditioning the closure on of the probes on the implementation of the deal. So that risks the U.S. front-loading unfreezing of assets and Iran coming into this process by stalling once again on the IAEA safeguards probe, and that raises a number of concerns.
باعتقادك هل سيتكرر مشهد رزم الدولارات التي قدمها أوباما للإيرانيين سيتكرر في هذا الاتفاق أيضا؟
I don't know if we'll have that repeat played out, but I do think we have to also think about the precedent that these kinds of exchanges set. And we saw this sadly in 2016 with the release of the American hostages in the original JCPOA negotiations. What we risk doing here is, if we're exchanging hostages for unfreezing of assets, we risk incentivizing the Iranian system to continue to take hostages. And that's why we need a broader multilateral effort to deter Iran from taking more hostages.
في الفترة الأخيرة بدت إيران وكأنها تتخلى عن بعض مطالبها، مثل رفع الحرس الثوري من القائمة الأمريكية للمنظمات الإرهابية. لماذا برأيك؟
Well, I think that the system likely calculated that this was going to be a non-starter in the American political system for good reason. And it decided to instead focus its demands on other issues. It migrated from the delisting of the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization to the removal of terrorism sanctions on discrete IRGC-related companies. And the U.S. apparently rejected that as well. That nevertheless, we still don't have a deal, and Iran is making now more demands on the guarantee side. So this is what it does usually. When it feels it's hitting a wall in terms of one demand, it appears to back off on that demand and doubles down on another demand for compensation. So this is a kind of game that they play, and the negotiations are still not over to this day.
جوزيف بوريل أكد أن الرد الإيراني على النص النهائي جاء معقولا. لماذا يبدو وكأن الأوروبيين تواقون للتوصل لاتفاق أكثر من الولايات المتحدة مع الإيرانيين؟
Yes, I have that sense as well. I think that Europe views the Iranian threat a little differently from the United States. It is more hesitant in employing coercive tools to counter Iran. Consider that between 2013 and 2021, actually 2022, I should say, the EU only levied 2 rounds of sanctions on Iran, one in 2019 in response to a plot to bomb a dissident rally in France, and another in 2021 over human rights abuses. And Europe wants to maintain commercial relations with Iran. It has embassies and has diplomatic relations with Iran as well. The United States does not. So there is that difference, and the eagerness can be explained in that way.
يعني الأمر ليس متعلق بالنفط وأزمة الطاقة الأوروبية؟
Well, I agree that that's also a very big factor. They think that they could use Iran as an energy source now that Russia is subject to its own maximum pressure campaign after the invasion of Ukraine. But I think that they also have to be careful here, because they risk empowering and resourcing Iran, who is holding their nationals hostage, is plotting terrorism in their cities. And, Russia and Iran in this sense are two sides of the same coin. So they really have to be careful.
الوكالة الدولية للطاقة الذرية أشارت إلى ضغوط سياسية تتعرض لها، وأنها تقاوم هذه الضغوط ومصرة على استلام إجابات من إيران عن آثار اليورانيوم الذي اكتشف عندها. هل هذا يعيق المفاوضات برأيك؟
Well, I think that it puts a lot of pressure on the International Atomic Energy Agency, because they are going to be under the microscope of having to give Iran a clean bill of health as to the outstanding safeguards probe, when Iran has a years-long history of stonewalling on these very probes. For example, it has not given technically credible answers as to the origin and the current location of this undeclared nuclear material in these safeguards matters. And there is the concern that the IAEA will be pressured, because of the desire to implement the JCPOA, to give a clean bill of health to Iran. But the IAEA Director General, I should note, has made some very encouraging statements of late, saying that he will not allow politics to enter these negotiations, and we'll have to see if that's the case, because the IAEA, unfortunately, has a very problematic history with regard to these probes. In 2015, world powers, the IAEA, I should say, prematurely closed the possible military dimensions probe into Iran's nuclear program, again, as a part of making the JCPOA be implemented. So there is cause for a concern here.
التسريبات عن الاتفاق ذكرت أن إيران ستحصل على ملايين الدولارات. هل ستستخدمها في التنمية الداخلية باعتقادك؟
Well, I think that this is going to risk resourcing Iran's proxies and partners around the region. That is the fundamental concern of the international community and those like myself who are critics of the nuclear deal. There is no control on the money flow here. And we saw this movie before in 2016 to 2018 when we had Syria, we had Yemen, we had Iran meddling and destabilizing the region, and there was no control on the funds. And the United States and the European Union and the international community did not have the willpower or the tools tools to counter that effectively, because the most powerful sanctions in the U.S. arsenal are scheduled to be lifted under a return to the JCPOA. Iran's energy trade, those kinds of sanctions. So that is the problem with the formula upon which the JCPOA is based, in my view.
أفهم من كلامك أن مخاوف إسرائيل ودول المنطقة في الخليج من التوصل إلى اتفاق نووي، هذه المخاوف تراها مبررة.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a critical mistake for when you have the countries who are most affected by any Iran nuclear deal, Israel, the Gulf Arab states, to be on the sidelines here. And that's the similar dynamic we had before. And I would add that, the US and the EU have been making a very big deal over the consultations they have been having with with the Gulf Arab states and Israel on the sidelines of the talks. But I have not seen those consultations translate into policy integration. And that is the challenge and the problem that these negotiations have faced.
هناك دول عربية رفعت تمثيلها الدبلوماسي مع إيران وأخرى دخلت في مفاوضات معها. هل تعتقد أن ذلك قد يخفف من سياسات طهران العدائية في الإقليم؟
I am not optimistic about that. I think that this is being used as a communications channel as a potential mechanism to de-escalate tensions should they arise. But I don't think that Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates are under any illusion that Iran's regional modus operandi and playbook will change, because it's a revolutionary power that is intent on dominating the region. It's really not interested in integration. It's interested in dominating these neighboring countries, and that has been the problem. The United Arab Emirates itself has is a victim of Iranian aggression. It was not too long ago, a couple of years ago, when there were reports that Iranian operatives were casing the UAE's embassy in Ethiopia. And a few months ago, the Iran's proxies and partners were lobbing missiles and drones at Abu Dhabi. So these will unfortunately remain facts of life in the Middle East, given the nature of the Iranian regime.
حول هذه النقطة تحديداً، اليوم قرأت تقرير يقول إن الإمارات لأن لديها علاقات اقتصادية مع إيران فلديها نوع من النفوذ والقوة، وذلك قد يخفف من سياسات طهران العدائية بعكس السعودية التي لا تملك هكذا علاقات. ما رأيك؟
The UAE does have leverage in that sense, because especially in Dubai. But I would say that that leverage hasn't really translated into meaningful improvements in Iran's on-the-ground posture throughout the region. And so I think that these channels of communication are being used to de-escalate, because also they don't think that the United States is necessarily reliable in responding to Iranian acts of aggression, and they want to keep these channels open. So this is all part of the calculation.
سيد جيسون، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.